Okay, you guys, I'm gonna pop in here really quick. It's late on a Saturday, and I'm just gonna quickly show you what I do for this mini. Okay, so what you're gonna need is, I like to use a mini iron. I like to have a wool pressing mat. You absolutely will need a yard of this fusible grid, I don't know, what do we call this? Paper fabric stuff. It's from Pellon. I have it in my shop at sohungryhippie.com. And here you'll need some scraps of fabric. You can use those little tiny charm squares. Those, I buy those a lot, and then I'm like, what am I going to do with this? Well, this is something you can do with it. Otherwise, get out your scrap bin or another charm pack, and we will begin cutting. Sometimes I use a goddess sheet, which is a Teflon sheet that you can just lay over your project and then iron it. And then you don't get anything on your iron. I have a few of these in the shop as well, sohungryhippie.com. So with that being said, I'm going to start cutting my squares. You can see what I've done already. I've started cutting these up. Oh, some are too small. You want to cut 1-inch squares, kind of accurately. It doesn't have to be microscopically perfect. You just don't want them to be 1.5 inches or something, because we're going to fuse them to these squares here. And then after the whole skull is fused, then we fold and sew. It's totally awesome. It's so much better than having to sew patchwork, teeny tiny squares. No, I'm just not doing that. So I am going to shut off audio and play you a gentle song as I speed up the video. So let's get sewing. All right, so now we're on to the sewing. I like to keep extra out here, but it's really up to you if you want to keep this much. I think I'm just going to trim it down a touch so it's not quite as big to work with at the machine. Let me move my ironing mat. But I do like having that extra around the edge. So don't trim it all away yet. All right. So the trick is we are going to, I know people will yell at me about this ironing here on top of my cutting mat, but I'm doing it so I can stay on the camera, okay? So please don't send me a message about how it's bad for my cutting board. I don't really care right now. I'm trying to be on camera. I'll buy another board. And so far it's been fine, so there. I don't want to sound like a smart aleck, but it's like, yo, I know the advice. Okay. So you see how on the back there's this grid paper, right? All these lines. So we're folding right on the line. I folded it down, so right sides together, fold on the line, and then we're sewing 1/4 of an inch away from the line. Okay, so can you see that? You can see that I'm not sewing on the line of the graph paper. I'm sewing, that's the fold line. Think of it like a fold line. Let me turn this down. Think of it like a fold line, and you're sewing 1/4 of an inch away from the fold. So here's my line to sew. I don't mark this every time because I'm using a 1/4 inch patchwork foot. So I will feed it in my sewing machine like this and sew right down. All right, so now we're just going to keep repeating that process all the way down. The skull will end up looking really crushed and crazy, but don't panic. When we're done with up to down, we're going to go sideways. Left to right, right to left, doesn't matter. So I'm just going to speed all this up and show you. So there's one row. If some squares pop off while you're sewing, just fuse them back down again. Not a big deal. So there's one row. Oops, like that one. Just popped off. It's all right. Just keep your iron handy. Got the skull finished and I let it sit overnight. So now I am going to trim all of this away and I'm going to sew on the borders and get this going. Now I will say this is not perfect. I should have just stopped yesterday and taken a break, but I was just too tired. So I have a couple of mess ups but I'm going to forge ahead because I don't think anyone else is really going to notice. All right, here we go. I'm still at a 1/4 inch here. I probably should hammer these seams down a little bit. Okay, so I'm just gonna, full disclosure here, mine I had to take some liberties with seam allowance and border size, and mine is not 16-inch square. Mine is more like 15. This happens to me sometimes, and I just roll with it, just make it work. All right, so I've got my bag covered in vinyl and my pillow. This is very similar to my Essentials Tote pattern. It's just sized down a little bit, but it's the same kind of basic technique. Okay, I hope you enjoyed it.